The highway is empty at this hour. Rain comes down in sheets thick enough to swallow the white lines on the asphalt, and somewhere ahead, the horizon keeps flickering, like the sky itself is short-circuiting. Inside the cab of an 80,000-pound truck, the wipers move as fast as they can and still lose the fight. The radio crackles, drops out, comes back with static. Then, for less than a second, the entire highway turns white. Not headlights, not lightning in the distance. A strike close enough that the whole windshield, the whole road, the whole world outside the glass goes blank and bright at once. That flash carries more raw energy than most people will ever stand near in their lifetime. A single lightning bolt can heat the air around its channel to roughly 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That is not a typo and not an exaggeration. It is close to 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. For a fraction of a second, the air around that strike becomes one of the most violent environments on the planet, and it happens at highway speed, next to a vehicle carrying tons of fuel, cargo, and a driver who has nowhere to pull over. So, what actually happens when that kind of force lands on a truck moving down an open highway? Does the rubber on the tires save the driver? Can a trucker even touch the steering wheel during a storm like this? Does the electrical system die in the middle of the road? Can the truck catch fire? Is the lightning itself the real danger, or is it everything that comes after? The answer is not as simple as staying inside and waiting it out, because in some real cases, the strike does not just pass through the truck and disappear into the asphalt. It leaves parts of the vehicle burned, melted, or completely destroyed, while the person behind the wheel walks away without a scratch. Surviving the strike, it turns out, is sometimes only the beginning of the problem. The road is full of stories most people never hear. Every 3 days, I bring you a new one. Subscribe to follow the journey. Most people carry one assumption into this topic without ever questioning it. Rubber tires protect you from lightning because rubber does not conduct electricity. It sounds logical. It is repeated constantly. And it is, at best, half true. And in the way most people mean it, mostly wrong. Lightning travels through millions of volts across thousands of feet of open sky. By the time it reaches a vehicle, the idea that 4 small rubber tires, each just a few inches thick, are going to stop that kind of charge is almost laughable. The voltage involved is high enough to jump across air itself for miles. A few centimeters of rubber on the ground is not what keeps a driver alive. What actually protects someone inside a closed vehicle is the metal shell around them. A truck cab, like a car, acts similarly to what engineers call a Faraday cage. When lightning strikes the highest point of the vehicle, often the antenna or the roofline, the electrical charge tends to travel along the outer metal frame, around the body of the vehicle, rather than through the open space inside the cab. The energy looks for the fastest path to the ground, and a continuous metal exterior gives it exactly that, running along the surface and down through the frame, while the air inside the cabin remains relatively undisturbed. This is the part that should make people stop and think for a second, because it means survival was never about the ground underneath the truck. It was about the metal surrounding the driver the entire time. The cage was already there. It just was not the cage anyone expected. But here is where the story breaks away from the comforting version. The driver may survive the strike. The truck might not. That same metal exterior that redirects the charge away from the driver still has to carry an enormous amount of energy somewhere. It travels along the antenna mount, down the roofline, through the body panels, sometimes into the electrical system, sometimes into components never designed to handle a sudden surge of that magnitude. The cab can protect a body, It does not always protect a circuit board, a sensor, or a length of wiring buried behind a dashboard. Picture the inside of the truck in the instant after the flash. The dashboard panel flickers. Some lights blink out completely. Others come on that were never on before. The radio, already struggling against the static of the storm, dies entirely. There is a smell that should not be there. Faint at first. Something close to burning plastic or scorched rubber, drifting from somewhere near the dash or under the hood. Outside, in the mirrors, sparks or smoke may be visible near the antenna mount or along the top of the trailer. None of this happens in slow motion. It happens almost instantly, and the driver has to process all of it while still controlling 80,000 pounds of moving steel in heavy rain at night, with visibility dropping by the second. This is the moment most people never picture when they imagine a truck getting struck by lightning. They picture the flash. They do not picture the minutes that follow. The truck rolling forward on a highway it can no longer fully trust, while the storm has not finished and the road has not gotten any safer. Real footage from highways and rest stops gathered after reported lightning strikes tells a story that theory alone cannot. In several clips, trucks believed to have been hit by lightning are shown afterward, with blackened antenna mounts, scorched paint along the roof line, shattered side mirrors, or tires that failed entirely, the rubber torn or blown apart from the heat and pressure of the discharge passing nearby. None of these cases claim that the lightning vaporized the truck or melted it into a puddle of metal. That version belongs to movies, not highways. What the footage actually shows is something closer to scar tissue, a vehicle that took a direct hit, kept functioning enough to get its driver to safety, and came out of it physically marked, sometimes badly, by an event that lasted less than a second. This is the part most people never imagine. The driver may walk away. The vehicle can be left scarred by the strike, sometimes in ways that are not even visible from the road, hidden inside wiring harnesses, fuse boxes, or onboard computers that quietly stop working without ever showing a flame. And that quiet failure is, in some ways, more dangerous than fire. Losing power on a highway in the middle of a storm is not just a mechanical inconvenience. It can mean losing headlights in a downpour where visibility was already collapsing. It can mean losing the dashboard instruments that tell a driver how fast they are going, how much fuel remains, whether the brakes are responding the way they should. It can mean losing the radio that connects a driver to dispatch, to other truckers, to any warning about what is happening further down the road. On an open highway in weather like this, losing communication is not a small detail. It is losing the ability to make an informed decision while the storm is still directly overhead. So now the truck has taken the hit. The driver is alive, but the vehicle is compromised. The storm has not passed, and the highway is still full of other trucks, other cars, and other drivers reacting to the same blinding flash that just lit up the sky. The lightning strike itself was over in less than a second. What it left behind, mechanically, electrically, and psychologically, is only starting. Because here is the part almost nobody talks about when they explain lightning safety in vehicles. The strike was never the only threat on that highway tonight. It was simply the most dramatic one. Underneath it, the entire storm system, the wind, the rain, the visibility, the chaos of dozens of vehicles reacting at once was already building towards something far more dangerous than a single flash of light. And that is exactly where this story has to go next. If the lightning strike were the only danger on that highway, this would already be a finished story. A flash, a metal shell, a driver who survives, and a truck that absorbs the damage instead of the person inside it. But truckers who have actually lived through storms like this will say the same thing almost every time. The lightning is rarely what scares them the most. It is everything traveling with it. A storm powerful enough to produce lightning at highway level is almost never delivering lightning alone. It arrives with rain heavy enough to cut visibility down to a few car lengths. It arrives with crosswinds strong enough to push against the flat side of a loaded trailer, the kind of wind that can shift an entire rig sideways on a wet road if a driver is not actively correcting for it. It arrives with standing water deep enough to cause hydroplaning, where tires lose contact with the road entirely, and steering becomes for a moment closer to a suggestion than a command. Now, add the human factor. Passenger cars sharing that same highway, driven by people who are not trained for conditions like this, who panic when visibility drops, who slam on brakes without warning, who drift toward the shoulder or stop in live lanes because they simply do not know what else to do. Add fallen branches, sometimes full trees, brought down by the same wind driving the storm. Add traffic that can stop without warning just beyond the next curve, invisible until headlights catch it at the last possible second. Add the simple physics of a fully loaded trailer, tons of cargo pushing forward on momentum the moment the brakes are applied too hard or too late. This is the full picture that almost never makes it into casual conversations about lightning and trucks. It is not one isolated danger. It is a layered, simultaneous set of threats arriving together in the dark, on a road the driver cannot simply pull off of whenever they choose. The lightning strike is the loudest part of the story. The storm around it is the part that actually decides whether the night ends safely. This is where the decisions truckers make, often without much time to think them through, start to matter more than any single statistic about temperature or voltage. Drivers who survive these storms tend to follow a set of habits that sound almost too simple to matter until you understand what each one is actually protecting against. They stay inside the cab with the windows fully closed, keeping that metal shell intact around them rather than creating any gap for the storm or the charge to interact with directly. They avoid touching exposed metal surfaces inside or outside the vehicle during the height of the storm. Door handles, frame components, anything connected directly to the exterior shell. They avoid handling electronics that are plugged into the vehicle's system unless absolutely necessary, since a surge traveling through the electrical system at the wrong moment can travel through anything connected to it. They slow down well before visibility actually becomes dangerous, rather than waiting until they can barely see the lane lines to start reacting. When a safe location exists, they look for it early, well before the worst of the storm arrives, rather than trying to outrun weather that is, by definition, faster than anything on wheels. And critically, they avoid parking under trees, near power lines, or beside tall, isolated structures, since these become likely targets for additional strikes during the same storm system. Perhaps most importantly, they do not get out of the cab to inspect damage while lightning is still active nearby. This sounds obvious stated out loud, but in the adrenaline of the moment, with smoke or sparks visible near the front of the truck, the instinct to step out and check is strong. Truckers who survive these situations consistently describe waiting, sometimes for what feels like an uncomfortably long time, until the storm has genuinely moved on before opening the door to assess what happened. Surviving a lightning strike, in other words, is not about outrunning the storm. It is about recognizing that the safest place to be is very often the place a driver is already sitting in, and resisting every instinct that says otherwise until the storm has actually passed. But surviving the strike itself is still only half of what a trucker has to manage that night. Once the flash is gone and the immediate fear fades, a different kind of pressure begins. The truck still has to be evaluated, and it has to happen while the driver is still technically inside a moving, possibly compromised vehicle on a highway that has not gotten any safer just because the lightning has stopped. Does the truck still respond the way it did 5 minutes ago? Are the brakes behaving normally? Or is there a delay that was not there before? Is the dashboard lit up the way it should be? Or are warning lights appearing that have never appeared before? Is there a smell of something burning that was not present earlier? Did a tire take damage from a nearby strike, and if so, is it failing slowly or about to fail completely? Is the cargo still secure, or did a sudden swerve during the flash shift weight inside the trailer in a way that changes how the truck handles? Is it safer to keep moving carefully toward the next exit? Or is the shoulder in this particular storm, on this particular stretch of highway, actually more dangerous than continuing on at a reduced speed? None of these questions have a universal answer. Every one of them depends on the specific truck, the specific storm, the specific stretch of road, and a driver who has seconds, not minutes, to decide. This is the part of the job that rarely makes it into how people picture trucking. It is not just hours behind the wheel. It is moments like this one, where a person has to read damage they cannot fully see, on a vehicle they cannot stop to inspect, while still responsible for everything riding behind them. There is one more detail that almost never gets mentioned in casual explanations of lightning safety, and it deserves to be said plainly. A strike that seems to leave no visible damage at all can still cause problems hours or even days later. Electrical systems exposed to a sudden surge do not always fail immediately. Components weakened by that jolt sometimes hold on just long enough to fail somewhere down the road, far from the storm that caused it, in a moment that looks, on the surface, completely unrelated. A trucker who walked away from a strike feeling lucky that night might still find themselves dealing with its consequences during a routine drive a week later, with no storm in sight and no obvious reason to suspect the cause. By the time the storm finally moves off toward the horizon, the highway looks almost ordinary again. The rain thins out. The flickering sky settles into something closer to distant flashes, soft and far away, more memory than threat. The truck keeps moving forward, slightly different than it was an hour earlier, carrying whatever damage it absorbed quietly inside its frame, its wiring, its panels. The driver keeps listening to thunder rolling somewhere behind them, growing fainter with every mile. For most people, lightning is something experienced from behind a window, a flash to admire from a porch or a car parked safely in a garage. For truckers, it can be something they drive directly into again and again, because somewhere ahead of them is a delivery that does not pause for weather, a shipment of food, fuel, or medicine that a city is quietly waiting on without ever thinking about the storm that stood between it and them. Because behind every truck on that highway is a story most people never hear.